Student affairs professionals are tired, and yet you continue to give all you have to support our students and our community. So I want to first just say thank you. So thank you for all you do. Like you and your colleagues, our NASPA association has also had to remain flexible and make difficult decisions. Under Kevin's leadership and with dedication of the entire NASPA team, we have continually refocused our priorities throughout the year to meet challenges while keeping a fixed eye on our values and strategic goals. We have realigned financial priorities and made big decisions in order to keep work going while also innovating to ensure that we keep you, our members, at the center. Decisions like the one made by your regents to move this conference to a virtual event, and the association's decision to move the 2021 national conference to a virtual opportunity as well. There's no doubt that we all feel the loss of not being able to meet in person. This is not how I envision being chair. I imagine myself going back west to visit, and I'll have to do that in the future again. However, keeping everyone's safety, as we know, has to be top of mind. We worked intentionally as an association to make an early decision about the national conference in order to ensure that our members would be able to attend. We also reduced the cost of participation in this event below that of any other association. We hope that the early planning and low costs associated with the conference will help to remove barriers for our members. The 2021 Conference Leadership Committee, led by Conference Chair Michelle Murray, who's at the College of the Holy Cross, has been hard at work to put together a meaningful experience for us all in March. We are currently in the process of completing conference program reviews, and thank you to all of you that served as reviewers. We really needed your support because we received close to 800 programs this year. And thank you to all of you that submitted programs. I am super excited about the conference and the content, and we often remark in the committee that when we chose our themes for the year before COVID hit, it was like a premonition of what we needed to focus on. So we're looking forward to engaging you. We're also excited about a lineup of speakers that we're putting together. So I wanted to share a few. Nicole Hannah-Jones, an American investigative journalist known for her coverage of civil rights in the United States, will be one of our keynote speakers. Also, Karamo Brown, a television host and cultural expert, will be joining us. And I'm really pleased to say that Daniel Wildcat, an accomplished scholar from the Haskell Indian Nations University, will also join us, and he speaks about the power of place and indigenous knowledge and technology in the environment in education. And so we are very excited to have him with us. This is an important conversation more than ever. And we are still working on a fourth feature speaker that we'll be ready to announce soon, so stay tuned. We're very excited about the different issues we'll be able to engage together on. In addition to keeping the association going and planning engagement events, NASPA continues to work to advance issues of diversity, equity, and social justice. If you have not yet, please read Kevin Kruger's statement sent to all members yesterday on repairing and recentering NASPA's work with the Indigenous peoples community. This important work has been going on for a while, and I'm really honored to partner with Kevin and many others to do this work. So read it for more details, but I'm grateful to Kevin in particular in the NASPA team, as well as the IPKC community, for continuing to lead and to partner with us in these very crucial efforts. I encourage you to take a deep breath and hope that you have a great conference experience and that you feel nurtured and replenished by this wonderful community that I know you're in, even if it is virtual. And I know that there's amazing things that have been already happening in the community. I look forward to engaging with all of you today and in March at the National Conference. And thank you so much for all that you do for us and for our profession. Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to Kevin.
Angela, you didn't tell them to put their oxygen mask on.
Don't give away my ending message, Kevin Kruger.
Oh, sorry. Well, welcome. Thanks for having me here, Anna and Chris. Thanks for the invitation in particular. And it's always a pleasure to serve on any program with Angela. She has represented you so well as the board chair this year. And I know it's such a trite thing to say when you talk about leadership, to say, right person, right time. And because sometimes you don't have the right person at the right time, but in this case we do. Angela's been a fantastic partner to help us maneuver, rethinking our association really, and also what we deliver to our members in this, pretty challenging time period for us. So Angela, thanks again for your leadership and partnership. Something sort of inside view, if you ever get to be board chair, I don't know if it's a punishment or benefit, but we speak weekly or bi-weekly. We have a 45-minute phone conversation. It's actually one of my favorite parts of being president is I get to have this really personal time with the board chair and on a regular basis. It's a real treat for me. Second thing, no favoritism here, but I am wearing a Stanford quarter zip in honor of being in the Western Regional. I was upstairs looking through my college gear because everybody gives me something when I come speak, and I found this one. So I thought I had a Region 6, Region 5 vest, but I couldn't find it. Well, so let me tell you a little bit about what's going on at NASPA. Some of this some of it you will reinforce things you already know about what we've been doing. But what NASPA has done in the last 8 months, really, in a lot of ways, has a parallel to what you've been actually experiencing on campus, with some obviously important differences because we don't have students. But every campus had to, in a very short amount of time, reimagine itself from largely focusing on value and in-person experience to being entirely virtual. And of course, now as we roll out in the fall, many of you are still virtual, or some of you are hybrid. We had to do the same thing. We were an association that had thrived on really timely, hard-hitting, robust live events that span the spectrum from our annual conference of 7,000 or 8,000 to smaller institutes. But in total, I don't know if you ever, I'll tell you, we normally run about 60 to 70 live events a year. And in the span of about 3 weeks, we had to cancel all 70 of them. And that was sort of the initial thing that we did, just like you had to move to your virtual classes. And then without that, then the second thing we had to do was renegotiate 67 contracts, which I'll tell you was kind of a slog of sorts. And I'll tell you, good news for NASPA is that to date, we have not yet had to pay any kind of cancellation penalties. So our partners in the hotel industry have been great with working with us. Largely, we have pushed most of our meetings out another year. But the real thing we had to do was reconceptualize the way we did work. That no longer we had teams of people who were dedicated to producing live events, and so we very quickly pivoted to developing an entire virtual learning and engagement platform and delivery system. Recognizing that you, as our members, needed information and resources like right away. And so we have done hundreds of live events since the pandemic started, and have moved all of our live event people to a virtual team. And we're doing virtual conferences like this one here. We're doing smaller short courses. We're doing 1 hour kinds of things. And I think I'd say that that's gone pretty well. I mean, I think our, in the beginning when we were doing events, we were getting, 1,000 or 1,500 people, sometimes 2,000 people for an event. We've had some very successful conferences. This is a great example. I think it was up to your registrations up to 800. What we're learning is that, not surprisingly, that the thirst for and the interest in information is one thing, and then we're all getting very adept at figuring out how to learn and engage in this kind of platform. Does it replace the in-person experience? No, it doesn't. And because what we know that from our experience in previous live events, and Western Regional is a good example, is the number one evaluated experience at a conference, let's say Western Regional, wasn't the sessions, even though they were fantastic. It wasn't the keynotes, it was the networking. It's what we really crave is the opportunity to connect with each other and to share ideas, to bond, to hug, to be in community with each other. I think that really is the power of not just student affairs meetings, but all meetings. So, we know we will come back to something like that, but obviously we have some time to wait before that happens. One of the things that we're learning, and we know, is that you have very little professional development dollars. Those of you on the call, and I think that's across the entire industry. That in a time when we have been cutting programs and furloughing and doing pay cuts and a variety of other things, professional development dollars we know went by the wayside. We learned very quickly that price was an issue. Angela mentioned trying to keep the annual conference rate as low as possible. Basically, here's what we have learned about events in general. If they are free, we get hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. We got a lot of people. As soon as we charge, we get very little people. So that's what figuring out like what the market will tolerate for price is a really significant thing for us. Now, I will tell you that in the association business, NASPA business, that we do, that we are able to sustain the organization through our live events in ways that the virtual events don't sustain that. So we have had to make some substantial changes ourselves. We have unfortunately had to lay off a number of people. We're down about 20% of staff. Hiring freeze, spending freeze, travel freeze. There was a 6-month period where everybody took some sort of hourly pay cut. It was 5% at the lowest level and 20% all the way up to me, in order just to kind of get things kind of balanced. We're a healthy organization, so we will survive this. We have, for the last 30 years, been built a reserve account, an endowment essentially that will help carry us through. So we will make it. But it certainly will have some challenges along the way. But we have fewer people, fewer staff, which means it's a little harder for us to service every possible need that you can imagine. Having said that, I think we're thriving in terms of our ability to, so far, to offer some really interesting programs. So, the same question that we think about on campus, we think about for NASPA. And the question we ask for campuses and the same for associations is, what were we doing before the pandemic that we're just not going to do anymore? And what have we learned in the pandemic? And what competencies or skills or strategies have we picked up that we're going to continue after the pandemic? And that's really where we are now. So, because that's really the new normal, right? The new normal is going to be something different than when it was before the pandemic. But some of the things we're doing right now, we're not going to keep doing. Like, I know some of the campuses that are represented here are doing affluent testing. If you know what affluent testing is, I'm not going to describe it, but that's something that we never thought we'd ever have to do before. We didn't know how to do it. Now we're doing it. We're probably not going to do that after the pandemic. And that's sort of a kind of funny example, but there's lots of things that we are not going to do, but there's a lot of things we are. And the summary of all that is that NASPA will look like a very different association in 2022 than it did in 2019. We're probably not going back to the same model. And what that model is going to look like is this. What we learn and we know is that some learning and some experiences actually are better done virtually. They're more efficient, they give you more flexibility, and some are going to require and you're going to want to have in-person experiences. And in the beginning, we're going to probably hybridize that. And in the end, we'll probably have different kinds of learning that will take place. And I think in some ways that will provide more access, more affordability, and allow us to take deeper dives on critical information. So that's kind of where we're heading. I think it's kind of exciting, actually, to think about how you re-envision an association in that way. The association world in general that I'm a part of, I a collection of some 60 or 70 other associations to deal with. Some associations are not going to make it. They just are not going to have the kind of loyalty that NASPA enjoys with our members, or don't have the resources to survive this. And the same can be said for institutions. Some institutions won't have either the brand equity or the resources to survive. And so we'll see some thinning out as we go along. And I think that's actually, again, maybe from a market standpoint, not a terrible thing. So let me just close by saying that what I appreciate about student affairs is what kind of Angela said, is the enormous contributions that we have made over the last 8 months. So people ask me all the time, like, what do you think, what's the future of student affairs? And I'd say it's unclear, but here's some things we do know. When the pandemic hit and campuses had to quickly go online, student affairs was at the center of that, of the strategies around that. When we had to discuss how we're going to open in the fall and what form, and what student affairs was at the center of that. We weren't the only ones, but right at the center of those decision making. So in that regard, I think student affairs is really well positioned because it's clear when these crises hit, when things are going, we play a significant role in the health of the institution. Having said that, I also, we want to acknowledge that we know that finances are going to be a really challenging issue in the next 2-3 years. Enrollment declines, challenges in state funding, a variety of things are going to affect that. And so what we expect is that student affairs will suffer cuts in the same way the institution does. So 5, 8, 10% cuts, 15% cuts in some cases. Those may be year over year. But the reality is when it comes to budget cuts is that student affairs is always the smallest part of the institutional budget, or only 8 to 10% of the institutional budget. So if a campus is looking at millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue that they're shortfall, you can't make it up by cutting student affairs. And what we're seeing in the news is exactly what campuses are going to have to do. Cutting academic programs, cutting key things on the academic side in particular, because that's where all the money is. That's where all the resources are. That's where the revenue, and that's where the expenses are. But it's going to be, what we do know, it's going to be a difficult fiscal environment for the next 18 months, 24 months for sure, at least. And we are aware of that, and we're going to try to be partners with you as we try to provide the best possible professional development for you at the lowest possible cost. So, Chris and Anna, I'll stop there, and happy to engage in conversation from this point forward.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Angela. One of the conversations that keeps coming up during our WRC is the recent election news. So given your both your seats, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the outlook at the Hill, and specifically what impacts might have the Department of Education and what's next in terms of the federal outlook.
Well, let's just, I'm going to start with a political statement. I am going to be, and the rest of most of higher education, just thrilled that the worst Secretary of Education we have seen in the last 50 years will be leaving office. Goodbye, Secretary DeVos. She has been an enemy to higher education, an enemy to equity, an enemy to fairness. There's been some mean-spiritedness that I've seen coming out of the Department of Ed that is just has been staggering. So let me start with that. So that will be an improvement no matter who is in that seat. There's no question that we are looking at back to an administration that will be pro-higher education rather than anti-higher education. And that's everything from the value of science and truth to just the value of a college education in general. And a focus on issues around affordability, a focus on the recognition that HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions and minority serving institutions play a critical role in the fabric of American higher education. That's already been messaged, as well as strategies around that we would expect around affordability and college cost. International students will be back, thank goodness. We will create an environment where international students from all countries from around the globe will be welcome to American higher education, and that we won't have policies that discriminate against certain countries based on their religious or ethnic background. Immigration will be a strong policy, progressive immigration policy will be a strong feature, and thank goodness we will once again be paying attention to our DACA students who have suffered mightily over the last 4 years in fear of deportation and in fear of being identified even at the campus level. So there's a lot of good news coming, I think. I think one last thing, I was reading an editorial by a professor at the University of Pennsylvania who was cautioning higher education to not do the opposite of what the current administration does. In other words, let's not do to conservative thought on campus what was done to liberal thought. And I think that's in our rush to be exuberant about the win that we got, because I think most of us probably felt like this was a win. We need to be careful on campus that we don't exclude conservative thought and do more harm than good in our rush to celebrate a progressive agenda. We have to hear from those students. We have to give them a voice, and we can't demonize them the way that many of our more progressive students felt demonized and ostracized under the current administration. So that was a long answer to a short question, but we're excited about the opportunity, obviously, to work, and we've already had outreach to the Biden administration and expect that they'll be open to lots of thoughts about how we imagine the future of higher education.
Well, we appreciate you cracking the ice on that one, Dr. Kruger. Dr. Batista, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I just had a couple of things. One is, yes, to the secretary being ousted. I have to tell you that I try not to post politically, but I did, and I will, because I think the harm that has been done in this administration is just going to set us back so much. And the 2 points that I will make is, how wonderful will it be to have somebody in the White House as a first lady who is in education and understands education. And I'm really hopeful that that will have some influence in some of the work that needs to be done. And I want to amplify Kevin's message around inclusion. One of the things I often say is that we cannot create inclusion by being exclusive. And that is the work of creating inclusion. Inclusion doesn't happen by accident, it has to be designed. And that's why it has to be designed, because it takes work to sit with, opposing views and across the table. And the last thing that I will say, I'm super elated around DACA and the attention that it will get. And the other piece that a lot of us have not been talking about, but I think it's such a crucial change, and I'm hoping that gets reversed right away, is the executive order around diversity and inclusion training. I can't tell you how many conversations I'm having with people who want to have training or want to talk about racism, but hey, you can't talk about systemic racial oppression, or you can't talk about white privilege. And I'm like, well, that's not talking about racism. So, it's just going to really allow us to really do the work. But I think we're going to have to really understand that our country is fully divided, and that is not going to be undone in a year or two. And so for higher education in particular, I think that this is going to have implications that are going to be way beyond this generation. And we cannot pretend that there isn't that such division, and that our students, simply because they're Generation Z and they have different views, don't come with those views, because they do. They come from those families, they come from those communities. And I think what this election really showed is that we don't have the privilege of just pretending that everyone that goes to college is interested in learning and becoming inclusive, because that's not the reality. So we really need to focus on equity, and we need to be intentional about how we do that.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just say one thing, and just it's not about the current administration, but I really want to, I think we have to acknowledge the critical role that universities and university staff, and many of them are student affairs folks who are in the civic learning space, played in getting students registered and to the vote. If you look at the preliminary data out of Circle and Tufts, it's clear a couple of things are coming into focus right away. One is, in these battleground states in particular, the youth turnout made a difference. And the voter of color vote made a difference as well. And so in places like Georgia and Arizona, these young voters of color, some of them for the very first time they've ever voted, actually turned the election in the direction on the outcome that we got. So, and that didn't happen by accident. That happened by a lot of hard work that all of you have been doing to try to get your students registered and to vote. And engaged, and again, the early data is that we saw youth turnout at blew away every record we've ever seen. So they were engaged, they were active, and they wanted their voices heard. And again, and particularly voters of color, young Black voters made a big difference in Georgia. And so I think we need to celebrate that accomplishment as a profession, because student affairs was central to that effort.
Great. Thank you both. Oh, what a great, we could have just gone on and on with that topic. So the next question is, what innovations have you all seen in our field the last 7 to 8 months? And what innovations are you all hoping to see in the future?
I've seen a lot of experimentation around how to engage students. And I think that's both a win and a challenge still. I think we're still trying to figure that out. But it was really amazing to see how an entire profession just pivoted, the word of the year, right? Immediately shifted to whatever platform they had or didn't have. Somehow we had to all figure out how to really engage from where we were with students. And I think that there were lots of interesting things. Kevin mentioned this in the beginning. I think that there are things that we found out. I remember at the beginning in the spring, we had more students participating and being engaged virtually than we did in person. And now I think we're seeing the fall, you know, as we all grow tired of having to engage in every part of our life virtually, I think you see an impact of that as well. So I've seen lots of great innovation around platforms and how to creatively create community in particular, which I think will stick around. The one thing that I feel very certain about is that we're not going to be the same profession. And I don't think we know exactly every way that we're going to change yet. Because we're still very much in it. And how much will we need to innovate as the pandemic continues? And hopefully we'll have a vaccine soon and we'll be able to start moving to normal living. But I think it's going to take a while before we all feel like we can engage and be with each other in a normal way. And that is going to continue to influence learning both in the classroom and outside the classroom. I think there were many opportunities for faculty and the academic side to really partner with student affairs in a different way. And I think some of that innovation around not being maybe completely understood, the value of what we bring as student affairs professionals is not always understood. And all of a sudden, it was a different level of attention. And I think the experience that the academic affair partners that we work with had and continue to have really created bridges that will allow us to innovate together moving forward around how we meet the new students. And I think that the fact that all these social changes and social issues are coming in such a different way means that we're going to have to really engage in a personal and committed way that is going to really take all of us. So I'm excited to see how we use technology, but also how we develop relationship building and community building as part of this new virtual hybrid world that we're in now.
So there's been, obviously a lot of innovation. Let me just point to a couple things. Like the rest of the world, we, by necessity, moved from a place where if you wanted to see a physician, you had to go into a doctor's office, sit in that waiting room, usually about an hour late, and then you finally go see a physician. And now with the advent of telemedicine, it's much more common now for us to engage with the medical community if you don't have to have a test done to do that virtually. Well, the same happened with mental health. 5 years ago, when we surveyed when the Association of Counseling Center Directors did its annual survey, only 5% of counseling centers had any kind of virtual counseling. And now, by necessity, almost every counseling center has had to engage in some kind of telecounseling modality. That's an example of a huge shift in both principle and concept, as well as in practice, that will have long-lasting impacts on our ability to service our students. We will still have clinical services on campus, but telecounseling will allow us to reach more students, particularly students who maybe have either for whom the stigmatization of going to the counseling center would be an issue, or perhaps who have barriers that exist in accessing the counseling center. That could be transportation, or not being on campus, or having a full-time job, or whatever it might be. So I think that that's a really positive thing for us, and I think it's going to allow us to reach more students. And the same can be said in the student success arena. I think what we've now been able to employ are more strategies that engage students virtually, mentoring, coaching, student success strategies, advising, even orientation, that again, I think will give us more options in how we can reach a wider range of students. And I think in the end, I think what we'll come to appreciate is that by becoming more sophisticated in the use of technology, we'll be able to reach more students and use the personal time of staff for the students who need us the most. And I think that's the end result that I think is probably the biggest innovation. I'll just share that there's a lot of other cool things that have been done. We were very fortunate at NASPA to get a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're in the middle of it right now, We have a national prize to recognize campuses that have done really outstanding work in essentially virtual student services. We're in the middle of that right now. Once those campuses have been identified, we're going to be able to say back to the field, here's what exemplary practice starts to look like in online student services, something that we have been behind in, really, frankly, for the last decade. So I think we're on the cusp of understanding a little bit more what innovation looks like.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see the transition that not all online students are the same. I mean, it's a very eclectic group and will continue to be. So did want to switch up gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit about the state of NASPA. And one of the questions we've received is, what changes do you foresee in the NASPA's foundation's ability to support its various initiatives as a result of the economic downturn?
Yes, the foundation has been really remarkable what they have done right away. They saw the needs that our members had right from the very beginning and took funds that they normally would direct towards research or other things and put it right into direct service to members. And so if you were in a position and your position was eliminated or furloughed, but you still wanted to be a NASPA member and stay professionally connected, they have scholarships for that. If you there's funding people who don't have any professional development dollars. They're funding people who are in transition. So they've actually directed a huge amount of resources to direct service to members who are suffering economically from the impact of the pandemic. From a fundraising standpoint, we also, like every foundation and every space, even campuses, recognize that fundraising is very difficult in this kind of climate. So we've kind of had to adjust our goals in terms of how we raise money, but they have not shied away from the understanding that today the need is right now. So I would say to all of you out there, they have not exhausted these funds. If you know someone who was affected by the pandemic and lost their job or was furloughed and wants to stay professionally connected, which is so important, and then if you want to stay in the field, please go to the NASPA website, the foundation website, or talk to your regional leadership. Will get you connected to those resources and that person to those resources.
Anything to add there, Angela, or?
No, I'm having a reaction to something I see in the chat, so I want to respond, but let me know when you think is a good time.
Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Me too.
Okay, great, thank you.
You first.
In the spirit of being inclusive, I want to acknowledge the comment that was made about this feeling like turning into a political celebration, and the question about whether or not NASPA is neutral, overtly political. And I don't want to speak for Kevin, he's the president, I don't run NASPA, but I will tell you that as an educator, as a queer woman of color working in higher ed for 25 years, this is political. It is not about Democrats or Republicans. That's not the kind of political that I'm talking about, but it does have impact. And the fact of the matter is that it's not intended to exclude anyone, but what I'm about to say, it's really true for me and for many thousands and thousands of people, that the policies that have been implemented, not only by this administration, by the previous administration, by every administration, has huge impact on what our students are able to access. And that's not just about BIPOC people. We know that there are, for example, lots of rural white students that are first generation that are struggling with poverty and access. And they're also part of this for me and for us as a NASPA organization. So I hope that you will be open to the fact that this is not, at least for me, not intended as a celebration or not, but more as an acknowledgement that we have been struggling and that, we did not get here by accident. Our history and our context continues to be center stage for all of us, regardless of what privilege or what subordinate identity you have. And so my hope is that NASPA will continue to be a place where those issues are front and center for everyone, and that we focus on creating a space where we can have those conversations. The fact of the matter is that NASPA has values that lift up that work. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and to say thank you for saying it. It's meaningful, it's important. We all need to be having conversations. It's not one-sided, and it really is about all of us. And I do, as a member, more than anything, hold NASPA responsible for doing that work. Thank you.
I would just add, I had I spoke at a conference sometime before the pandemic, and I think I might have been talking about Title IX, I can't recall. And I said parenthetically, I don't want to be political, but, and then I kind of said what I had to say. And a colleague of mine who was there said, that's you saying I don't want to be political is another dimension of your privilege, because you can say you have the privilege of saying I don't want to be political, but for many of the people in the room, it is political in the very way that Angela said, and it was really kind of an epiphany for me. We're not political, and I'm not political in my NASPA world around whether you vote Republican or Democrat, but we are political in terms of the issues, in particular some of the human dignity, equity issues, and social justice issues, which are the bedrock of what we stand for in student affairs. So when there's executive orders about transgender students, that's not a Republican Democrat. That's a political issue because it affects the lives of the students who are in. DACA is a central issue in our public policy agenda, supporting those students, those dreamers who are here, who are in college. We want to support their education. So there's a whole range of things like that that are political, but not about the Republican or Democratic Party. And I think that's an important distinction. We are neutral in that regard, but look, if you look at our public policy agenda, look at what I write about, look at what we focus on. We do lean progressive. Having said that, I would go back to the same thing I would say for student affairs professionals and students, and yet we need to have the conversation across differences. We may have an opinion about immigration and DACA, but we need to hear all perspectives. And so I think it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. It takes a lot of courage to ask that question, and sometimes, I think we're not neutral. We do have a set of values that we stand behind, and that is part of our work. At the same time, I think creating opportunities for that honest, authentic dialogue is also important as well.
Thank you both for that. That was great. Chris and I I was like, oh, there's something in the chat. So that was great. Thank you. I'm going to ask the last question, and then Chris is going to ask both of you the really last question, which is, okay, can you just share one or two of the last things that you read in print that you could recommend for folks that really lends yourself to think of either higher ed now or just what's happening now? Just one or two things that you've read in print, books, newspapers.
Sure. I'll tell you, to the point that we just discussed, which was sort of this notion of what's taking place on campus. I'm going to pull it up here so you can. I'll find it because I just finished reading it. It was an editorial by. Hang on one second. By a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and it was entitled. Oh crap! Hang on. Well, it was essentially saying, let's not make the same mistake that we accuse the right of making, which is to drown out the left, and let's make sure that the left doesn't drown out the right. It kind of gets back to that same point that just came up, and it's sort of cautioning us in many of the kind of enthusiasm around the election to recognize that there's a lot of our students who voted for the current president, and so that we need to create that space. The editorial was, universities imitated Trump's illiberal spirit. Biden's admonition to abandon harsh rhetoric and listen to one another applies to our nation's campuses. So it's sort of taking to heart what President-elect Biden has said about moving away from demonization. I thought that was really a powerful message for us.
I have been reading lots of different things. If you listen to my speech when I took over as chair, I talked about appreciative leadership, and there's an article that I was reading yesterday by David Cooper writer. It's called Appreciative Inquiry in a Broken World. And often there's this misconception that being appreciative in philosophy means that you only see the positive. But he really did a nice job of talking about during regular times, being appreciative and open and looking for strengths and possibility and all of that. It's really meaningful. In a broken world is even more important. And so I was thinking last night a lot about what are all the ways that we continue to be broken and all the ways that we have possibilities to heal. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. And it's something that I've held on to a lot during this year. So it spoke to me very loudly last night.
I have one more. I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal called "Companies Offer Creative Solutions to Worker Burnout During the Pandemic." I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is the psychic impact that this pandemic and the workload we have placed on student affairs professionals, what this has meant for those who are doing this work, and the experience of burnout and mental health issues among student affairs staff, given the exhaustion and the pressure, is something that we really have to grapple with as a profession. One of my colleagues had said sort of kind of an obvious thing is that when you left graduate school to go into this field, none of you came to that work thinking you were going to put your life in danger. You didn't choose law enforcement. You didn't choose you're not an emergency responder. You're a student affairs professional. And yet, who is on the front line of the pandemic if your campus is offering any kind of frontline live classes, or your residence halls are partially open? It's the student affairs staff in the union, the residence halls, and the recreation center trying to create a living experience. Yeah, we're doing it with social distancing, but we're actually, it's not just the pressure. We're putting on the front line our own student affairs staff. So this burnout thing is something for us, really something important for us to consider.
Thank you very much. I hate to cut this session short, but we have a few more seconds. So I think the chats and the commentary really says a lot. So let's give everyone a big virtual round of applause.
Yeah, very active. Thank you for the active engagement. Yeah.
And in conclusion, I would like to hear from both of you. What are you streaming or reading or watching right now? So we'll start with Dr. Kruger.
Well, on the personal note, I just finished The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix because I liked the haunting of, what was the other one? There's another haunting show that they had on there. I just finished that one. That was, it was not as good as the first one, but good. And I'm also watching The Unknowing on HBO with Nicole Kidman because she's so good.
I heard that's good.
She's awesome. Yeah, it's really good, really good. So that's on the personal note. On the professional note, I do what I do. Nothing's changed about my reading, and I every morning spend the first hour and a half of my day doing the same thing I did before the pandemic, and that is I read just higher ed stuff. I have 5 or 6 news aggregators. I read new reports that come out. Like this morning, I just read the new clearinghouse data that just came out on the enrollment. That's what I do. I try to absorb what's happening and make some sense out of it for our future and how NASPA can help position you, our members, to be as successful as possible on campus.
We'll leave the final word to Dr. Batista.
Well, I just posted a comment on the chat, so I don't have time to say it. You can read it there. But I will say that I am all about Hallmark movies right now because you need to escape. And I am in Florida right now, so winter Christmas is not happening. So, and I have been having lots of conversations about diversity in Hallmark movies. I kind of stopped watching for a while, and I'll end with the fact that my cousin texted me yesterday. She goes, "I'm watching this movie, and there's a gay couple, right? When it first starts," and I'm like, okay. And then I was watching last night, and it was like a Latinx family, and I'm like, okay, it's slow, but it's still, you can still see the tokenism here and there, but it's like, well, nobody was there before. So you know what? Equity works has to happen everywhere. So I'm enjoying those movies and just marking the progress as we go through. So take care of yourselves. And since Kevin gave this away, something that I like to remind people is to put your oxygen mask on first, Kevin Kruger. So remember to take care of yourselves. And I'm going to leave you with this, something a colleague sent me this morning. It's okay if productivity looks different currently. Mm-hmm. Please know that it's safe to pause, to rest. In fact, resting is productive. You're not doing nothing. You are recovering. You are recharging. People who rest are stronger than those who don't. Give yourself permission to recharge not only your body, but your soul too. So thank you for all you do.
Where did he get that? Where's that from?
I don't know. It says LWH. It was a quote. So I'm
Okay,
gonna,
can you send it? Can you send it to me?
yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
So for everybody, our next session starts in 8 minutes at the top of the hour. So we'll see you soon, but keep on chatting, Kevin and Angela. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for inviting
Thank
us.
you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.